Good evening. It's truly a pleasure to have all of you here for this special screening of the first episode of Mopa's docuseries titled The Sound Alchemists, a film that traces the journey of the Veena, not just as an instrument, but also as the symbol of a tradition, of a community, and as a living, dynamic expression of artistry. Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge that this film has largely been shaped by the incredible musicianship of Ramana Balachandhran. And I would like to thank him for generously sharing his inputs and insights with us for this project. I would also like to thank my dear friends Veena and Pepe Gomes of Kishima Arts Foundation for this very important initiative called The Critical Insider that gives us an opportunity to take this narrative beyond the screen and to hear directly from Ramana his experiences and his creative processes with the Veena. I would also like to thank the Bangalore International Centre for making this happen. What you saw today was a 50-minute abridged version of the entire documentary, which is actually for 90 minutes. It's up on Mopa's YouTube channel, for those of you who've not seen it. And there are several aspects of this instrument that can be spoken of at length, such as its origins, its evolution through the centuries and the last few decades, and also the long list of great vainikas, musicians, each of whom has contributed significantly to the soundscape of the instrument as we know it today. But to set a context for today's session, Ramana and I will be talking about the Veena as it is today, as it exists today, and how it can be leveraged in highly musical ways, essentially the potential of the instrument. I would like all of you to listen, engage, and of course, questions will be welcome at the end of this conversation. So, Ramana, my first question to you is, every instrument, let's say in the context of the Indian classical music, has a certain oral identity, a certain sound in collective memory, in collective experience that has been fed by so many musicians who have handled that instrument. In your opinion, what is this core oral identity of the Veena? And the second part of the question is, can the Veena be played innovatively without losing this core aesthetic?
A very good evening to everyone. So, when it comes to the Veena, there's a certain sweetness and warmth generally associated with the sound of the Veena. And that's largely due to the fact that you would have noticed in the documentary that we spoke about how the Veena is tuned an octave lower. So, the violin, the flute, in the northern tradition of music, sitar, sarod, all of them are tuned an octave higher. So that's the open string or the open sa, whereas that's the bass shadjam in all the other instruments. And this gives it a certain warmth that it has been associated with always. And the fact that this is a plugged and fretted instrument brings in some very unique characteristics to the tone of the instrument. Because it is a plugged instrument, the amplitude has a very abrupt peak. It peaks and then quickly starts decaying. And it's not a continuous tone like the voice or the violin or a flute where it's blown, or even the nagaswaram. So, because it is not an instrument that produces a continuous tone, and it is rather an instrument that has plucks that die away and the sound dies away, there's a very organic fading of the tone that is present. And that is also, the plucking also contributes to a very clear distinction of swarams, for instance, while playing Kalpana swarams or while representing Sahityam. There's a certain attack in sound engineering parlance that is associated with each pluck, which gives you a very clear sense of the consonants, basically. Which is a little hard to, I guess, get on a flute or a nagaswaram. Violin, if you, I guess, make your bows a little more abrupt, you might be able to get the swarams, and that's how perhaps they do it. But this is one of the, probably the only instrument which has that characteristic. And that makes it very unique in representing Sahityam and Swaram. I'm just thinking aloud about what makes this instrument gain its oral identity, which is very unique. And another thing that I think is very unique is the lower range, as we discussed. It's one of the very few instruments which go down until, say, 50 hertz. So that is at like 70, 80, that goes further down. And it's not just about the fundamental, but also the overtones. So with what I've seen, I might be wrong, after listening to recordings of Rudra Veena, which is the only other instrument which I can think of which goes, really low. The fundamentals go down till, the frequencies that we just saw, but the overtones seem to be, more on the Veena, hence giving it a very deeper sound in the lower octave. And that, as we saw, when coupled with the first string, which gives the madhyasthai, is a very, very heart-tugging sound, and which is very unique to the oral landscape that Veena is able to create. The other thing is the talam strings, which is a very unique addition and a way to indicate the rhythm, either in the composition, while playing swarams, while playing tanam especially, which is a very distinct contribution that Veena makes when representing our music. And the talam strings also offer us a beautiful opportunity to accent things in general. And even, so what I've tried doing is to tune the talam strings a little differently. So let's say you're playing a ragam which has a jiva swaram as the Chatushruti Rishabham. So what I like to do in ragams like Sahana, Dvijavanti, for instance, is to tune one of the strings to the higher Chatushruti Rishabham and use it more like a sound filler. So I'll probably give an example for that. So for instance, take Dvijavanti. So it's not really a very structured way of plucking the strings, rather just something that I find musical. It's a little random and more feel-based. So though I've come back to, so I'm just kind of accenting that re a little bit. And so these are some very, I think, unique ways by which Veena gains its beautiful oral landscape. So maybe this is an example of where you can just kind of stretch what's been done all this while and see how you can kind of take it forward and realize more opportunities. So this I thought was a very tempting thing to do. So the other issue, one issue that actually there's a funny story behind this. Usually the tuning that we do for the talam strings is sa, pa, sa. So the first string is tuned to sa, which is actually tuned to higher sa in my Veena. And then, so I do either sa, pa, sa, the higher sa, pa and higher sa. So the reason was actually that this lower sa, when tuned in the talam string, would kind of fluctuate because the string was too loose the tension was not enough. And by increasing the tension, and the only way to do that is to do put on a thicker string. And that kind of takes away that, brightness in the tone. You have to use a slightly thinner string. But by using a thinner string, what will happen is you'll get this, when you pluck the talam string, it'll go like ta, ta. So there's a word for this actually. I don't know what that is, but now because it's tuned to the higher sa, it's a very clear note. There's no fluctuation. So one of my good friends and musicians, brilliant musicians, Sri Rampart Sardhyana had told me, I don't use that string at all. Then I thought, okay, maybe because instead of taking it out, maybe just tune it to some other note. And that's when this experiment started. Yeah.
I'm sure Ramana can give you just about 100 other examples like this of the kinds of things that he has done with the instrument. But we'll continue that later. So the Veena is also synonymous with the gamakam. For maybe some of you who don't know what the gamakam is. In Indian classical music, gamakam is an ornamentation given to a note. It's an oscillation around the note, between notes. And of course this is to put it very simply, it's a very deep subject. Many kinds of gamakams. And it is this treatment of the note that gives that particular raga its unique flavor and identity. So, how do you think you can balance technical virtuosity with the Veena's characteristic gamakam-driven expressiveness?
So the reason that Veena has been talked of as a beautiful medium for expressing gamakams is because it offers one of the best visual referencing possible. So that's the reason that when you learn to play the Veena, you learn to be more and more sure of what the notes in between notes are. So gamakams and anuswarams or microtones are basically about the magic that happens between two notes or two semitones. So when you learn to play the Veena very sensitively, you end up developing this skill to visualize what's happening musically, parallelly and spontaneously. So sometimes I'll just slightly digress a bit because there's a very interesting thing that happens. There came a point where I couldn't sing or listen to a piece of music without seeing the Veena frets in my head. And this is both a boon and a curse sometimes. So why I say that is, the advantage, coming to the point that we were discussing, is that you have a very solid visual depiction of what's happening musically, which means that you can be very accurate with the sound that you produce. So, for example, so we'll take the same raga that we heard in the documentary. So this phrase in Danyasi has an oscillation between Chatushruti Dhaivatam, and which is a non-existent note in the scale, by the way, and which is Kaishiki Nishadam. So the oscillation is between, so basically is like a crude definition of that gamakam. And the knee in Danyasi has different colors, and it cannot be defined very exactly as an oscillation between this frequency and that frequency. It is somewhere over there. Also, I like to believe. So, because you can't really strictly codify these things. So, now that you know that it's something between this da and this ni, you can experiment with the depth of the gamakam, the pace of the gamakam, and the frequency of the oscillation. So, for instance, is one option. So here, the frequency of the oscillation was initially ta-ra-ra-ra, and then slowly it increases. It kind of goes like a very steep graph. So, ta-ra-ra-ra-ra-ra. So this is a very unique anuswaram, as we call it in Carnatic music. So, those oscillations are the same frequency. Now I'm going. So now I can decide to make the oscillation a little shallow. Instead of this deep, I can just make it. So this is a different color. Now I can try. So if the oscillation is happening between this note and this note, sorry, this note and this note, I can push the whole range a little bit. So now it's an oscillation between some note between Chatushuddhi Devatam and Kaishiki Nishadam, or even higher, in fact, sometimes. So all these possibilities open up, or rather you become more aware of all this when you play the Veena. And that's probably the reason why it's been associated with, or called one of the most conducive mediums for representing Gamakams. And it is, though it has been given that, label, which is true also, it is equally good at representing Shuddha Swarams. For example, because of the fact that it is a fretted instrument, and provided your Veena is made very well, and you know what you're doing, Shuddha notes can be very, very powerful. So, for instance, so you see how powerful that Shuddha note is? So I could have done a Gamakam version of the same phrase. It's also fine, but you see how beautiful. So this is equally good at representing Shuddha Swarams, and in fact, I would say it is easier than a violin to represent these Shuddha Swarams, because it is fretted. You have a very concrete space to reach to. So if I have to go, so I've heard from a violinist friend of mine who says these jump phrases, which go like 8 semitones or 10 semitones from a particular semitone. It's like, so reaching that exact note on a violin is more difficult than reaching it on the Veena. And this is one of the very few instruments which kind of clubs this pulling, and we'll discuss more of this maybe later, but so that gives you some idea about what I wanted to say.
So as you can imagine, it was very difficult for me to compress everything that Ramana had to offer in 90 minutes. You could imagine my plight. My next question is, are there inherent aspects of the instrument, like you mentioned some in the documentary, like the fretted sustain, the plucked articulation and so on, that affect its capacity for speed and dynamic phrasing? Yeah.
So first of all, as you all can see, I have an instrument which makes me go like 2.5 feet to go 3 octaves. So it's a lot of distance to cover for the hand. And not only do I have to cover such a large distance, I also have to press, which is a very physically taxing thing. And that is the reason why even relatively simple phrases that other instruments, let's say you have an intermediate practitioner of a violin or a flute and a Veena, I've asked some of my flute and violin friends, and they seem to agree on this aspect, where relatively simple phrases in Gamaka-laden ragas, like even Danyasi or Todi or Kamboji or whatever, they are very physically taxing. You can get them pretty accurately, but to get them requires a lot of physical effort. So even for me to do something like so a simple phrase like so now it looks easy, but it was like really physically taxing at some point. And after doing it hundreds and hundreds of times, you kind of get sweet spots, you refine your technique and everything. And these linear ascents and linear descents, where you traverse several notes in one direction, be it forward or backwards. So it's even tougher when it's clubbed with a gamakam like this. If you go like, that's easier. Just one second. This is one problem of retuning the Tanam strings, by the way. So, any form of linear phrasing which is going in one direction for quite a distance is pretty hard on the Veena. And I feel there are some phrases, for instance, which I played in the flute, which I don't think a Veena can match ever. Like things that traverse from the lower to, say, here at a very rapid speed. So I can play something like that. So even the other day I was experimenting something in Hindolam. I'll try to get it, it's hard. Once more. Not perfect. So you see, it's really hard to go linear. So these are some things that the physicality of the instrument kind of impedes. And anything that is gamaka laden, again, very stressful on the hand. And I have to do specific exercises to keep them in shape. And because I also sing, I know that if I sang the same phrase, I wouldn't be as tired as I am. Right? So in the concert, sometimes there's this mental conflict that happens. Oh, I'm getting tired. Come on, push, push. So that is something that happens. What else? Again, plucking is another thing that seems to have a certain limit. So with my experience, I feel that you can go up to like 160 or 165. Like. So this is around, say, 150 now. If I'm more warmed up, I can go slightly faster. And then it got me to kind of experiment with other plucking techniques, which involves using 4 fingers. And that allowed me to go till, say, 220 or 230. But that requires a lot of warm-up, at least like 3 hours of warm-up. So I can't show it now. It's there on a YouTube video. This Beha Gati Drut video I uploaded some time back. So these are some limits that need a lot of rethinking and pushing, physical pushing, to kind of see where it can go. Whereas, say, bowing at 160 is not as physically strenuous, just the bowing part. But here, even plucking at 120 for 5 minutes is very stressful. So these are some...
I remember when we were filming this part of
yeah.
Shuddha Sarang, Ramana would have played this phrase at least about 60 times.
Yeah.
Because he was not satisfied with the output. And at the end of it, he just looked at me and he said, I've played it so many times, now you just choose whatever you want. And I said, everything sounded brilliant to me. How am I going to choose one which is the perfect? Everything was perfect. But that's the kind of work that he puts in. So, what you just said, in an art form like Carnatic music, which is predominantly voice-driven, we've had great vocal traditions.
Yeah.
How does improvisation, right, differ between Veena and the voice, or even Veena and other instruments like the flute and the violin?
Right. One, again, this is kind of related to what we just spoke. The fact that you have access to a lot of these very delicate microtones and movements gives you, say, a shortcut to kind of getting them or visualizing them, as we discussed. So that is, I think, something that helps vainikas conceive certain kinds of phrases which might be otherwise a little harder to do on other instruments or the vocal or on the voice. So things like, very gamaka laden with a lot of complex joinery, so things like that. And I've heard from another violinist friend of mine that these phrases which kind of fudge their way through, traverse their way through few octaves without really going on a very concrete pattern, something like this that we just played, are quite hard on the violin. And he is, again, something that he can get with practice, but way harder than the Veena. And specifically comparing vocal, I was just thinking about this point while coming here. Because there is this lack of the constraint of having to pronounce solfege, sarigama padani or whatever, and you just can focus on the sound while playing kalpana swarams. Let's say in the slower speed kalpana swarams. So, for instance, so while singing, people generally go ga mari ga mari re na. They won't do that generally because there's a constraint of having to pronounce something there. Because we don't have that, we can do stuff like. So if I had to pronounce that, so I should have to, force myself to think, okay, re ma, but it's ending in ga, so I don't want to do ma. So re ga da, it still sounds a little odd, but I can comfortably explore these directions because I don't have the constraint of having to pronounce these solfege syllables. So that is another point that I had in mind. Another thing that happens on the Veena, which is very interesting, is that there are very instrumental aspects, especially specific to a fretted instrument, which allows for both pulling and sliding, and pulling without losing sustain, unlike the sitar, for instance. Right? So in the sitar, I don't think this is. That's possible because the sound dies away very quickly when you go across notes. So because of all this, and the fact that it is a plucked instrument, there are some instrumental aspects that you bring in, say, you can bring in alapana. Say you're finishing the alapana. So this, when sung, might not sound as interesting as it does on the Veena. And while, making some patterns in swaram. So what I played now. I could do that, but again, it's harder to come up with the required syllables used to pronounce this musical piece. Then, because there's no constraint on that, I can do all these patterns, which are very interesting to explore. So,
Conversely, there is also a faction of people that believes that the Veena needs to be played as the Veena, right? And not have vocal influences on it, or not have the Gayaki style on it. And of course, these are all subjective aesthetics that people tend to drift towards based on their own preferences. What is your preference?
So if I have a certain musical thought that I need to express on the Veena, and I have to do it using inspiration from some other medium, which is not the Veena, and I find it musical, I just do it. That's what I've been doing. And I don't really think too much about, okay, is this too vocal, or is this too violin, or is this too flute? If it's just nice to listen to, and if it makes me happy, I just do it. The other thing, though, is there was a phase where I would use vocal as the medium to kind of think most of the time. And because of that, what happened was I wasn't using instrumental dynamics as much as I should have. So, for instance, using left finger based techniques, like when you want to do sounds okay, brings in a little more of that crispness, which I like, and which I could have done if I had probably thought about, okay, how can I bring some Veena elements into this, and I could perhaps add a third string for the first half of the phrase, all these kind of things. So otherwise, I just go by what moves me most of the time. So I don't restrict myself to one type of deriving inspiration. So,
We all know that the concert format has changed periodically. Now, as a young and active performer today, how would you define modern concert demands? That's the first question, first part of the question. And are there inherent constraints in the Veena's design, that make it less adaptable to match this concert format today? And if yes, how do you adapt?
right. I guess the most obvious thing now is that, catering to the diminishing levels of attention spans of all of us, artists are having to kind of tailor the performances a little differently. And I think it's harder to make the audience be one with the process, which might not give instant results. When you're practicing at home, for instance, you might not be able to produce very interesting stuff or new original stuff all the time. And it's very hard to kind of, how do I say it, engage with the audience. So the point is to engage with the audience without really compromising on our discovery process on stage. So that is a challenge, I feel, with the modern audience that we have. It's one thing to play, for instance, an alapana saying, yeah, I discovered these new phrases that I hadn't played before, or I had a good time exploring da for 15 minutes. But it's another to say, okay, I kept an audience wrapped in attention for 15 minutes. So you try to find a balance between both of these. And that, I think, is one work in progress. And how much do you give importance to both? How do you not end up just playing for the audience? And I at least believe that if I'm moved by something, and I'm truly sincere in that, I feel the audience also gets moved. So I've based most of my content on stage on this premise. So that is one thing that happens. And I guess some things that happen organically in my case, for instance, singing in my concerts, I feel has, it gives kind of a respite from listening to one tone monotonously, and sometimes it's helpful to bring in a new energy, a different kind of energy that is, not possible to bring on the Veena. And these are some points that I've mentioned in the documentary as well, but I thought reinstating them will kind of give more context. There might be situations in a song where you feel like the singing might help you, gather that energy that you think the song deserves. And because the Veena, coming to the second question, is, sometimes it can very honestly be demotivating while practicing at home, because, you're really intensely practicing and then all you hear is like, right? So it's a very weak output instrument. Unlike, say, I play the mridangam. So again, mental conflict problem. So or the feel that you go like, you feel the vibration in your stomach, and then you feel it around the room and everything. And the Veena doesn't give you that. Amplitude can be a serious demotivator when practicing Veena. Sometimes that's why you resort to, connecting yourself to a mic or some form of amplification to practice. So this aspect can sometimes make me want to explore just 30 seconds of singing. So it's both respite for me and the audience and keeps it kind of fresh. This is again something that I think that the modern audience also I believe engages well with. Though I've received some criticism for that because I don't sing at D sharp. The structuring of concerts, again, kind of related to how the audience is with the process and how much results they expect, is something we were just discussing with my father at home. Having to structure the concert such that it has compulsorily has a few high energy sections. Finally there are a bunch of 100 people or whatever, several hundred people paying money and coming to your concerts. You have a responsibility towards them. So finding that balance between satisfying yourself as an artist and your principles not being compromised and ensuring that the audience feels something, return feeling, lingering with something, is something that I think this day we have to think a lot more about.
You also spoke about bringing in influences from other systems. And again, here you have two schools of thought, or maybe more schools of thought. Two main schools of thought, one that says such influences need not or should not be brought in, and in order to maintain the purity of this one particular tradition, whatever their definition of that tradition is. And the other school that says that this helps to expand, the creativity and whatever. What is your opinion on this?
So, the incorporation of a different genre into Carnatic music, in my case, will be in the form of some kind of contrast in the music. If you go really, into the nitty-gritty of it, it's either going to be a contrast of, it's going to be a different way by which the same type of oscillations are done, or this different mix of oscillations and flat notes, or it's going to be a new kind of oscillation. Like for instance, in Ghazal, the Ghazal tradition, I learnt a lot of interesting anusaram which I had never thought about, and it took a long time for me to even sing it or reproduce it to some extent. So this is where I think each artist's threshold of or rather interest in trying to push oneself to just represent other musical forms on their medium is intriguing. See, it was very intriguing for me, and I thought it kind of gave me, kind of stretched my fingers, it stretched my brain. So that was a very satisfying experience for me, and that was a serious driving force in trying to include some of these incorporations into my performances. And each one, I guess, has a threshold of how much diversion is okay for them. So for instance, let's say I'm playing Behag. This is a Carnaticized Behag, say. And then I go. So it's also about how much proportion it is. So if you play like 50% of, say, a Hindustani or a folk-inspired Behag and a 50% of Carnatic, it's going to sound very different from, say, 10 or 20% of the other. So it's also about where your own threshold is, and also where you want to use it. So if you use it in completely like nonsensical spots, for instance, I'm playing, again, I'm coming back to Danyasi because so I'm playing like the pure Carnatic Danyasi now, and then suddenly I decide to go. That's like way off for my threshold. So that's too much of a diversion for me. So I might say that, see, I'm trying to bring in that Ghazal idiom into Danyasi and make a phrase. It's fine. But this level of artistic liberty for my own self is not, attainable. So it's also about that threshold. So as long as it's within that threshold, and the artist kind of enjoys doing that and finds it musical, finally, again. So if something is very musical and moves you, I just would gladly do it.
So as I said earlier, we can go on and on these lines, but now I think it's time to ask you if you have any questions or anything that you would like to ask Ramana.
My name is Shanti Rao, and the question is, even S. Balachandhran, the great maestro, used the magnetic pickup.
Yeah.
He did a lot of experiment with that.
Yeah.
And that is a technology, it is totally different from the contact pickups that are regularly used. It is the transducer technology. So it is digital versus analog.
Yes.
In all the systems that we record,
Yeah.
there is a total difference in magnetic pickup and
Correct.
contact pickup.
Yes.
I mean, people have come up with so many solutions. They use both, combine both and all that. But that is helping the Veena techniques, don't you think so? And of course, takes away a little bit from the traditional sound.
Yeah.
But these are things we are battling with.
Yeah. Definitely. I mean, the use of magnetic pickup gave this a little bit of this artificial sustain. For the people who don't know, the magnetic pickup basically relies solely on the vibrations of the strings. It completely negates the role of the resonator. And on the Veena, the most important part of the Veena, which generates sound, is the soundboard, the top board, and the bridge. Bridge doesn't generate sound; it is basically a conductor of sound. So the magnetic pickup basically negates the role of the soundboard and the resonator, the kodam. And it's basically a coil inside which gets an electric current induced on it when the string vibrates. The string is also magnetized, basically. So that gives an artificial level of sustain, which means that it's sometimes good for practice, and you can kind of explore, that's probably why Balachandran sir was able to kind of really work like, amazing levels of mastery onto the pulling technique. And it kind of zooms in and amplifies all those minute nuances, and it can be helpful to kind of correct yourself also. But if you're someone that likes to represent something very close to what you hear at home, you might want to go the acoustic direction. And see, finally, ma'am, it's also ending up digital, right? Even the piezo pickup that we use today is ending up, being digitally, transmitted. But this basically, the piezoelectric pickups basically capture the sound generated by the vibrations of the soundboard, and a condenser mic, for instance, would basically capture what is coming off of the Veena, or the air aspect. I would ideally like to use a condenser, directional condenser, with a little bit of this pickup to get the sound that I like to hear when I'm practicing Veena at home. Unfortunately, condensers are very, notorious for their leak and feedback problems. So we can't really use that. And when you're playing to an audience of say 1,000 people, you can't rely on a mic like a condenser mic to amplify that. It's going to amplify everything else. So that's the reason I use an acoustic, which is the next best solution. When I play in a studio, I use sometimes just one condenser mic. Like recently, I tried a Neumann mic, which was so good. In fact, we were just, we wish that we used that for this documentary, in fact. So sometimes just a condenser mic, which is so good, will help capture that air or the natural sound of the Veena. So, yeah.
So you have the Veena and you have the Mridangam. And the Mridangam is more abstract, and it doesn't give you the same kind of range of obviously what the Veena gives.
Right, melodic possibilities.
As far as the phrasing goes, and it's a much more limited thing. But do you imagine the Mridangam phrases also to have similar colors, or like the variations in tones, or how do you interpret something like that? Because sometimes I'm honestly like jealous of all of the textbooks and all of the vast literature that this Veena and all of the vocal music has. And then the percussionists we're just basically going off of vibes.
Well, there's only so much you can do with a percussion instrument. Yeah. Because it's not a melodic instrument, obviously it's going to have a different kind of reach. Right. And in some ways, percussion is way more global than melody. Because melody, you have to have some idea of the rules of that particular music to kind of really appreciate that. Percussion is something anyone in the world can groove to, which is like a huge advantage for percussionists, right? And in that sense, it's like super wide. When you think of the core possibilities or variety of sounds and content possible, obviously melody instruments will, win. But I guess there have been so many masters who've, tried to expand that gamut of possibilities of sound and content, and they still are. So in Mridangam, as you know. So.
So do you imagine for example, the kind of analysis that you just did on the Veena?
Yeah.
Is it? Can you think of the same things on the Mridangam also? Like, okay, you take one aspect, phrases that are played on the outside or in the center of the phrase.
Yeah, I do it all the time. I at least try to. Okay. And it's a different medium of exploration, and that means that it makes you think in some different ways. So whenever I try to make a korvai I like to just create new phrases to play on the mridangam, and I go by tactile sensation. So that is that's an interesting point where the tactile sensations play a huge role in the content of the music also in any instrument. Just like each one's voice has its own limitations and paths that it likes to take, the mridangam, I try to do that, yeah.
A lot of the compositions that we play today are invariably written centuries ago by artists who've been prolific in vocal and a few instruments and then passed down through generations. So, do you see a way in which the compositions handled by teachers who've taught the veena or played the violin versus a pure vocal artist? Because at the end of the day, it's a sangati, and the way that teachers learned it from their teacher and then teaching it to their students. Do you see a way in which it's different, or you see like nuances handled differently by?
Absolutely, yeah, yeah. Not only, comparing vainika traditions and vocal traditions, if you take a vocal artist that knows how to play veena, the kind of sangatis that he accesses are going to be a little different. And it's not that the others cannot sing those, obviously not, but it's just that you have different levels of ease to access different things when you know different mediums. So, for instance, a musician who knows how to play the violin will obviously have access to a different type of sangatis, which I might not think of right off the bat. So, there are some phrases that I have to force myself to think about, types of phrases. Like the linear runs, they might be able to come up with a linear run for a 4-akshara gap, which I might not even consider because I know that it's like difficult as hell in my instrument. So I won't go that direction. So those traditions will obviously have different sets of sangatis. So yeah, definitely.
Yeah, to expand on that point, we are currently working on this project on Lalgudi Jaraman sir, and we find that so much can be said about the way he actually constructed his kritis. The same kriti that everybody else sang, he has actually approached how he built up the sangatis over the Pallavi or Danu Pallavi, very typical, and keeping the violin and the aesthetic of the violin in mind. So it's interesting, yes, of course it can be done.
Yeah.
And it has been done.
I have two questions. One is about the fretboard, about the placement of the frets. So every time one touches the veena, sends a silent prayer to the person who tuned it so well. So anything we can attempt only is possible because of that,
Definitely.
that artistry. So have you thought about something of, how to make it, what can I say, how to preserve the best, or how to make a veena friendly to carry.
Right.
Years back, Rajeshwari Padmanabhan's husband, Mr. Padmanabhan, arrived at a sort of fixed fretboard made of synthetic material.
Right.
Then afterwards it was quite forgotten, and I'm sure it will not have the acoustic and quality of the wax fret. But then, do you think of working on this direction and somehow making it friendly? And also, there are versions of veena which you can pack into a suitcase.
Yeah.
Have you thought about it?
Yeah.
And another question,
Yeah.
because that person talked about Patandram and handing over and, different instrumental genres handling compositions. So now we have this huge difference of opinion, I might say, with Dikshadhar Padandrams.
Yes. Yeah.
So we are constantly bombarded with a completely different version of Todi and Ahiri, which, and when someone states there is a documentation and support of it, but then it is difficult to digest this.
Yeah.
So what's your take on that?
Okay. On the first question, yes, I've thought about that. I used to have a veena which was portable, where the kodam would be, cut in half, and this soraka would come out, and then the top dandi plus male pagam would go into one case, and I would carry the other. The problem with those designs is, as of now, there is no standardization in the veena process making beyond a point. So the thing is, even if you go to our maker and say, I'll give you how much ever money you want, use the best materials, there's not a lot of guarantee of getting a good veena with good nadam. So that got Appa and me thinking, okay, how can we address this problem? And because of the veena being a very feeble instrument, and nadam being left to luck most of the time, and so we were working, Appa was working on an instrument, new design of an instrument, where there would be more amplitude, firstly, and richer nadam, and a way to kind of get that hit rate of getting good veenas better and making it portable. You know, wax, after all, as you know, is like super fragile. It's going to go away. And not even, you know, bumps, even temperature can, you know, affect the melam. So in our experiments, we saw that the 90% of the sound is contributed by the soundboard, not even the kodam. So we tried a design where the kodam, we've experimented with like 350 different types of bridges with different materials, different plates, shapes, and various designs of the top board being made of skin, metal, different types of wood, thickness, bracing, guitar kadila bracing mari. So all that we've tried, and we realized a prototype which was 10 times as loud as this Veena, acoustica. So if I played the Veena even without this pickup, the person at the back would be able to hear it. And we were able to come up with the prototype. Unfortunately, we couldn't finish it due to the fine tuning taking a lot of time, and we had to pause the project. And those Veenas had fixed melams, and the melam didn't seem to accept the core nadam of the Veena. There were some parameters like sustain, for instance. Sustain, there are few varieties of sustain. The sustain that you get when you pluck the string alone, when you pluck the string while pressing on a single fret, and the sustain when you move across frets. So all this to get, it was like a hugely complex problem to solve. So it's lying there. The problem is not solved fully, but we were able to realize some prototypes in that. The other thing with melam is, I realized that mathematically consistent melams are not orally consistent, as you know. Yeah. So in fact, it's only recently I spoke to my maker Raju sir about this. Every time he would make the melam, I would come home, use a hairdryer to melt the wax and adjust the frets to my liking, because the gas would be high, Chatushruti Devatam would be high, Antara Gandharam on the second string would be high. He was using the tuner, the electronic tuner, to make the frets. Then we realized that's not going to work. So we did one go of that, and then another go of just using our own ears to kind of calibrate it. So fixed melams, I think, need a little more refinement on, figuring out, okay, like a fixed formula to ensure that it's orally consistent. So that's why if you see here the ga fret, the distance between the ga fret and the ma fret is different between from the distance of the Antara Gandharam and the Sadhana Gandharam. So all these inconsistencies have to be accounted for. Second question about Patantrams. I think we don't know how the disciples of, say, Dikshatar, how capable they were, what they wrote down, and there have been so many iterations. In the middle, there have been so many musicians who have added their own touches to it, and and they've all done it very sincerely. It's not to change something that is. They've all done it in the process of finding their own music.
That's
I feel
part of the oral tradition.
Correct. Exactly.
Which is what ours is. It is an oral tradition.
Correct.
Every generation that learns something adds or deletes or edits something in what has been learned.
Yeah. When there is variations from these variables, creativity of the musicians, capability of the musicians, award of voice, each one's voice determining some sangatis, and the person who wrote down that notation, I don't know what these variables had to play there. Because of all this confusion, I feel to say that is right is, I think, too far-fetched. But to say that I like that version, I sing it, I believe that this is what is most closest to that version is fine. It's just a personal taste. But to say that version is right, or SSP the stuff that is the Pradarshani, Sangeeta Sampradaya Pradarshani, the stuff that is there is the only right way to sing that, I think, is a little far-fetched.
I'm going to do a little test here.
Yeah.
Just for some fun.
Yeah.
Why don't you play some Ananda Bhairavi with just the Shuddha Daivatam?
Okay.
How many of you here are familiar with Ananda Bhairavi? So, Ramana, can you just play the Ananda Bhairavi as we know it today? us can relate to, of course. Now can you try?
I have not. See, it's funny that I have not learned the proper Shuddha Devatam version of the Ananda Bhairav. I just know a few phrases which go like. Auntie, why don't you sing it? Ah.
The point being that when we are listening to music, we are usually listening to our memory of something that we've heard. Whatever we are listening to at a particular moment, we are also reliving what we've heard, what our parents have heard, or recordings that we've heard. So there is this relating to something that happens. So even if a text like the Sangita Sampradaya Pradarshini had been written meticulously, I think it was valid when it was written, because we don't know how it is now. What we do now know is what we've heard probably the last 60 or 70 years of musicians, the way they have handled and whatever they have given us. That is the aesthetic that's in our head. So like Ramana said, if there is somebody saying that that version of a particular ragam or a song in that text is the only right version, it's stretching it a bit, actually. Because this whole concept of right and wrong itself is very fluid in a fluid art form like Carnatic music. What we can say, like he said, is that it's a personal choice. You sing Ananda Bhairavi with Shuddha Daivatam if you want. If your audience is going to be able to relate to it and enjoy it, good for you and good for them. Basically, it's a test of time. If you can actually make that Ananda Bhairavi stay and be alive and aesthetic and reach your audience. But to say that this version of Ananda Bhairavi that we know today is wrong and only that version is right is not practical, first of all. And I don't think that's the best approach.
Definitely.
Also.
Again, I think it boils down to what each musician's goal while doing music is. Is it to basically say that, okay, I'm going to be as correct as possible, or I'm going to be as consistent with history as possible, or I'm going to be as consistent with documentation as possible, or is it to just feel some joy while you're playing something? Is a question that we have to ask ourselves. And it's not that one is right or wrong, it's just a choice that you have to make. I think belong to the latter category. So if something that I'm doing now is considered a little unorthodox while representing a composition, see, we all try our best to not compromise on the integrity of the composition as we know it. So we don't want to deliberately go and change a Dikshitar Kriti just for the sake of doing it. But if something makes me more connected with the Kriti by adding one Sangati or something here and there, I would gladly do it. Because if I'm able to connect with the song better, why not, is what I feel. So.
I'm sure all of you have heard Vatapi Ganapatim, right? Most of you would have heard this song. And we all know the version of the song which has quite a few Sangatis in the Pallavi. And the build-up is all very nice and, so all very beautiful. I actually heard from, the text version of Vatapi, which has about 1.5 Sangatis in the Pallavi. And I was waiting for the more, I said, okay, and then the Pallavi was over, and before you knew it, the song was over, and I couldn't relate to it. And I think I'm fairly open to these kinds of experiments. I'm fairly open to the possibilities of those different versions. But that's what I was trying to explain, is that the collective memory of Vatapi is that now. So to break that and to take it back artificially to a version of Vatapi which is supposed to be contained in that text, is it really necessary, is my question. For maybe purposes of, scholastic pursuit maybe, to say that, to document that yes, there is this version of Vatapi as has been recorded in the document, maybe yes. But how far is that necessary or central to practice, to active performance, is something we have to think about.
And one also has to think about how music evolves. See, how much primacy do we give to veracity of compositions? So, coming to one of the related questions here is, when you learn a song, when anyone in the past learnt a song and he taught it to his student, we are in no way sure about what he added, what he omitted. And that's how music has evolved. And and if you enjoy the end result that you have gotten, it's just fine, I feel. And if there were only one category of people who said, okay, I'm going to exactly teach what I learned from my guru, you wouldn't have had this much of diversity in music also, I feel.
I have one point
Yeah.
here. What we also have to think is that we are also freezing Dikshidhar in that time. If Dikshidhar had been today, he had been a man of those times where he was very experimental.
Yeah.
So it's a good possibility exists that today he would have actually approved many of these that have come in. Right? So we are trying to freeze Tyagaraja or Dikshidhar at those times,
Right.
and they have been the greatest experimentalist composers.
Right.
Like Balamurali used to say, you criticize me for being, something like very experimental, but much more experimental than me was Tyagaraja. So if Tyagaraja had been today, he would have accepted all those changes in Ananda Bhairavi or any other raga, and probably would have composed in that style also. So as long as you don't destroy the composition too much, I think whatever, as she said, as the oral tradition comes in, we have to accept it with the reverence to the composer and also not freeze the composer there. To agree that the composer also would have approved these changes over a period of time.
Yeah.
That's also very important. As she said, it's a scholastic pursuit that this is what is there.
Yeah.
But you cannot go back some 4 or 5 decades of what has been the performing art and go back to a time, and you go on to a time where gamakas were very less.
Yeah.
Or, if you hear Vasudevachar singing Todi, it's a totally different
Correct.
Todi.
Yeah.
There is one recording of him singing Todi, and what Todi we know today is totally different.
Yeah.
And it's just a span of, say, 30, 40 years. Or even when Vasudevachar was there in 40s, 50s, right? And I'm saying that by 60s and all, the Todi has changed so much. And I'm sure he would have composed like that if he had, right? So that's another point we have to keep in mind, that we as Carnatic listeners and musicians should not freeze our composers there.
And also the fact that we can celebrate the fact that there are so many versions.
Yeah, absolutely.
Why cannot we celebrate that instead of criticizing it or see it as an inherent weakness? It can also be seen as something beautiful. The fact that we have so many different styles, so many different schools of thought, and all of them so aesthetic in their own ways.
And if you listen to some of the versions, instrumental versions especially, say Manavayalakan of MSG Mama, MS Gopalakrishnan, violin, it's so instrumental and brilliant. And we also have to understand, when we listen to certain types of music, when you listen to different people, you have different blinkers on. And this is something that I've been inculcated from childhood. And you don't expect everything everywhere, right? So when you're listening to say, a fast piece, you don't expect raga bhavam there, as you would expect in a Chaukakala piece. It's a different kind of ragam that comes out there. And when you go, say, about 200 or whatever, there is not going to be much of raga bhavam there. It's going to be a different exposition of the ragam. Like that, when you listen to MSG Mama's Manavyala Kinchara, it is so beautifully constructed and so much of violin in it, just like Lalgudi Mama did it in his own way. And these sangatis, there if you go and expect, is there sahityam? I'm not able to hear the sahityam, I'm hearing more of swarams. Yeah, you will hear more of swarams, you'll hear more of bowing, but that's the beauty of it. And it's these risk takers and non-risk takers that have added to such richness in our music today. Both are necessary. So to say one is right and one is wrong is just, again, too much of a stretch.